Hi, this is Valerie Leonard again. I am the founder of nonprofit Utopia and the host of the nonprofit Utopia community. I want to welcome you to Lesson 1, Capacity Building, and we're talking about lasting impact, building sustainable organizations. So in lesson 1, we will talk about the definition of capacity as it relates to this course. We want to make sure that we're all on the same page using the word capacity the same way because as you probably have noticed, capacity building means different things to different people. So we want to make sure that we're all using capacity the same way as it relates to this course. We'll talk about the state of nonprofit capacity building in the Chicago area. And again, I want to remind you that if you're not from Chicago, not to worry. Capacity building tends to be universal. You know, some organizations struggle with it more than others, but every organization, regardless of how simple, regardless of how complex, regardless of where it's located, is going to deal with capacity building issues at one point or another. We will also talk about trends in capacity building and nonprofit compliance, as well as the characteristics of sustainable organizations. And when we talk about sustainable organizations, in this case, we're talking about organizations that have staying power. So what is organizational capacity? And again, I'm talking about organizational capacity as it relates to this course so that we're all on the same page. So when we talk about organizational capacity, we're generally referring to organizations' potential to pull together their human, financial, and other resources in order to make a positive change in their clients and their communities. And organizational capacity is impacted by a number of factors, including leadership, because as we know, everything rises and falls on leadership. It also depends on the organization's stage of development and changes in the environment. And as I mentioned before, regardless of the size of the organization and the stage of development, all organizations are going to deal with organizational capacity issues. They just may differ from organization to organization based on size and these factors we just talked about. So let's talk about the state of capacity building in the Chicago area. There is a company called Learning for Action, and they were engaged to look at the landscape of the Chicagoland area. So we're looking at Chicago and the collar counties and look at the lay of the land as it relates to capacity building. And when they did that landscape study, they found that nonprofits are under-resourced across the sector. So regardless of where the organization is located, whether it's in an affluent neighborhood, whether it's in a poor minority neighborhood, they all have a very hard time securing and allocating resources to carry out basic organizational functions. And that stress has been increased as a result of the state of Illinois tightening the reins in terms of the funding that they have given nonprofit organizations. Learning for Action also found that nonprofits serving communities of color face even greater challenges to accessing resources, and as a consequence, they have greater capacity building needs. And the greatest needs for all nonprofits, regardless of where they're located or who's running them, include board development, fundraising, strategy and planning, and leadership development. When Learning for Action looked at the trends in capacity building, they found that organizations that engaged in capacity building activities, regardless of what those activities were, they were more likely to experience financial growth. It didn't matter if they were learning to do fundraising more effectively. It didn't matter if they were learning to manage their finances better. It didn't matter if they were developing programs or doing strategic planning. Regardless of what the capacity building intervention was, they were more likely over time to increase their financial production or their financial performance. And they also found that coaching and cohort-based capacity building services are increasingly popular among nonprofits. You see a number of executive coaches for nonprofit executives, including the chief operating officer, including the CEO, including new managers, basically learning the ropes through some experienced mentor. They also found that there's an increasing focus on building collective and sector-wide capacity. So when we're talking about collective and sector-wide capacity, say for instance you are in a community and you're looking specifically at housing. So all the housing organizations may get together and develop programming, and as a collective or as a coalition, they're looking at their impact, trying to scale their services. So as a result of this collective impact, they're scaling programs, and there's consolidation in the sector, meaning that there are fewer organizations in the sector. And evaluation has become an important tool for funders as well as nonprofits. So for funders, they are really focused on impact measurement because they want to get a sense for how their dollars are being spent and whether or not they're being spent effectively. And on the other side, nonprofits are looking at evaluation because they want to develop stronger programs and ultimately, be in a position where they can market their programs to funders, market their programs to their clients and community and all that good stuff. Nonprofits see capacity building as important, and they're going through great lengths to engage in capacity building activities. We also know from that study that the majority of funders are not planning to change the amount they invest in capacity building, and in fact, even though they're focusing on it, they're going to work with with organizations that they have funded in the past for programming and invest in capacity building activities so that they can have more impactful programs. Okay, let's talk about nonprofit compliance. When we talk about nonprofit compliance, we are talking about the degree to which organizations conform to rules, laws, policies, and procedures that are imposed by the IRS, our state government, such as the Attorney General's office, such as the Secretary of State's office, our local governments, say our counties, as well as our city, could be our board of directors, could be our management team. But whatever our operations are, we need to be held accountable to several layers of governance, so to speak. So in my own work, I have found that regardless of what I'm working on with my nonprofit clients, it could be strategic planning, it could be board development, it could be financial management, all roads lead to nonprofit compliance. And just to give you an idea of how important this issue is or the magnitude of the issue, just in Chicago alone, there are over 12,405 tax-exempt organizations that are in good standing, right? However, only about 10,000 of these organizations have in fact filed with the state's Illinois Attorney General's office. So there are about 2,400 organizations that have not registered with the Attorney General's office. So they are either inactive, which is, I think, unlikely, or they are raising funds illegally. And the sad thing is, most of these organizations are not aware that they should be filing at the state level. They're so focused on making sure that they're in compliance with the federal government that they didn't think about what was necessary at the state level. And also in Chicago, we had about 9,800 organizations, in fact 9,840 to be exact, that have had their tax exempt status revoked by the IRS because they didn't file Form 990 for 3 years in a row. So the compliance issue is very, very big. And again, these are just two issues. One, we're talking about filing 990s, and two, we're talking about registering with the Attorney General's office. This says nothing about the organizations that are having problems because they didn't file payroll taxes. There are other organizations who are having other issues dealing with, say, not filing for insurance purposes, etc., etc. In fact, I have a whole class and a whole compliance challenge that will go through the list of all the things that you need to understand and be in compliance with so that you can maintain not only your tax exempt status, but be in good standing at various levels of government. So why are we talking about compliance and why is it important? As I mentioned before, all roads lead to compliance. And if organizations are not in good standing with our federal and state regulators, let alone their funders, they'll find it virtually impossible to raise funds. Because again, the IRS can fine them, which in some instances can put them out of business. They can revoke their tax exempt status. And foundation by law won't give to organizations unless they are tax exempt. So they're basically between a rock and a hard place if they can't come up to speed with compliance. And another reason why it's important, aside from the penalties, let's look at the positive. When organizations are in compliance, they are really in a much stronger position because in many instances, almost all instances, any compliance document, be it your Form 990, be it your reports that you have to make to the funders, they want to check and see, how did you perform financially? How did you perform programmatically? And what impact did you make? And it only makes good sense, if you're reporting this and you know that you're going to be held accountable, that you would, do the best you can in those areas. So compliance actually strengthens organizations and ultimately strengthens the sector. So now that we know what organizational capacity is, as well as the lay of the land in the Chicago area, what are some of the characteristics of sustainable organizations? And again, in this instance, when we talk about sustainable organizations, we're talking about organizations with staying power as opposed to those organizations that are, environmentally conscious. So what activities are they most likely to engage in? So at this point, we're going to talk about the characteristics. The characteristics of sustainable organizations include being powerful, being productive, and being profitable. And as I indicated in our course intro, sometimes it seems a little strange, to say that a nonprofit is indeed profitable. But for our purposes, we're looking at their soundness, if you would, of their financial management operations. So I'm going to end lesson 1 right here. We will go into more detail about powerful, productive, and profitable organizations in lesson 2. And in the meantime, if you have any questions regarding this course, you can email me at ValerieFLeonard at nonprofitutopia.com. And Nonprofit Utopia members, you can post questions also in the class forum. If you're not a member, we encourage you to join Nonprofit Utopia at nonprofitutopia.mn.co. And if you are a member, we encourage you to visit the forum early and often and make your contributions known. And I want to remind you to follow Nonprofit Utopia on Twitter. And you can also find us on Facebook. And once you find us on Facebook, make sure that you like us. So I'm not going to hold you much longer. I invite you to go to lesson 2. And I also remind you to make sure that you're taking notes in your workbook. And also be sure to take the quiz before going to lesson 2. Alrighty? So I will see you in lesson 2. Take care.